it's hard to be productive and work on things when these atrocities happen, that you kind of everything that you do for your client or work that is just really rewarded by monetary exchange. Don't be quick to produce something. As much as you're personalizing by you using the data that you found on me, why don't you spend a little bit more time in creating the conversation with me?
Okay, so welcome everyone, and please let me introduce my guest for today's podcast. His name is Stanley, and Stanley is a digital and experiential designer and the founder of BeCurious Studio, an award-winning digital design agency based in New York. He has worked with brands such as Microsoft, Marina Bulgari, Rachel Ray, and global events such as Rio Olympics. He has recently founded a platform that helps creative community fight injustice and discrimination. There they are providing tools and resources for creatives to join the fight against the struggle of injustice, prejudice, and wars. Welcome, Stanley. So glad to have you here.
Thank you, Ankit. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate a wonderfully descriptive intro. You should be writing my bios for me, man.
It was really interesting. Actually, I've gone through your LinkedIn profile, and there were so many credentials, and I was very picky, like what should I include in the introduction. So yeah, wonderful. And with the recent, yeah, please.
It's interesting to see as you go through different interviews what people pick out as what it deems to be essential to them. So it's always nice to see what people pick out. So I'm glad you did a good job.
Awesome. So I'll just start with this your new initiative, like No Shelter. It is really interesting, and I can say I've never seen something like this before. So what made you start to take this initiative, and what was the cause of this, and how do you see it progress in the future?
Right. Well, I guess to give a bit of a backstory, I've been in the industry for a long time. It's coming up to 18 years soon.
Wow.
So I saw the evolution of the creative world from when I studied, what the landscape looked like back then, what the social commentary and the landscape looked back then, into what it's involved into today's world, and the things are changing so quickly. But I think the only relevant and static thing that remains through it is obviously our journeys, our ways of working, our ways of evolving as creative people. And through all of this constant, I think, unfortunately, one thing that is also constant is that constant injustice and the prejudice that a lot of creatives experience.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, I felt that as creatives, we're not really necessarily seen as the go-to people in case of emergencies. We're not the frontline workers. We're not the type of people that you would really be, reaching out to them. It's like, oh my God, this has happened. Obviously, you have healthcare workers, you have politicians, you have policymakers, and lawmakers are the forefront of that, right? Military operations. Yeah. And it always kind of bothered me, because I felt that we're really not making, we're not curing diseases. We're not doing anything that I would back then thought of as like deemed important. And I really wanted to explore, what is the deep meaning behind what we do? Is there in fact a meaning behind all of this? How does our work and involvement echoes in eternity of the timelines? Obviously, of course, as you get into the field, you learn about all the great people that have helped shape this community and this form and this niche and this market. But outside of the community, very few people know those names, right? It's a very particular siloed community. And at the brink of the Ukrainian war that has happened over 2 months ago now, I kind of felt it more than before. It kind of really dawned on me, and I wrote a little blog post, an excerpt, kind of expressing that feeling. And then I spoke to other creatives, and they kind of shared the same notion, that they're like, yeah, I feel your pain. And it's like, it's hard to be productive and work on things when these atrocities happen, that you kind of everything that you do for your client or work that is just really rewarded by monetary exchange takes place. It's like, it seems irrelevant at that point in time, what would you do if you were on that front? I think me being from New York, I have the luxury of not necessarily facing those things, but it's always on your mind. Like, well, what would happen? What would you do if you were put in that situation? And I think through that post, it kind of gave me the push to move forward and kind of explore that a little bit further. And as we started as the first response to, okay, so how can we immediately help the creatives that are displaced by war? You know, and there was a lot of wonderful initiatives that sprung from that, you know, that have started out as very similar to ours, where really uh, the goal was to bridge the people that are displaced by war with the job opportunities, so they can continue providing for their family and their livelihoods. But there, as I said, there's a lot of those initiatives. So what ended up happening is that I took a step back and I really thought of this. Okay, so what is the bigger picture here? You know, while this war goes on, you know, there's a lot of other, even unpublicized wars that are continuing going on. You know, the opportunities of people in Colombia, let's say, the opportunities of people in Middle East and Palestine and Syria, you know, all those things are still going on. I don't think they're taking the primary spot in the media just because it's not profitable for them, perhaps. But there's still things that are happening, and they really the idea was that, you know, we shouldn't be just pro one particular cause or one particular war. I think we should be pro the people that are behind it, and how does that affect everybody on different levels. And that's, as you take a look at this just as an industry and what problems we face, is that there's a lot of these injustices and discriminations and ageism, sexism, racism that are happening all across the board. And it's not really unique just to the creative industry. It's pretty much, you know, agnostic to the industries. It's everywhere. But I think the reason why I've taken a step in the creative, because that's the world I know. That's the world I live in. That's the world where my name bears a little bit more of a weight than anywhere else.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
for sure, definitely. And I think it's a very, at your stage, you took something, and probably it takes a lot of courage to start something like this, because you are opening a lot of new avenues of criticism, or like feedbacks, and something which is completely unknown to you. What I'm expecting this point. So, as a designer, what do you think? Let's say I'm a new designer, I'm just starting out. So, for me, the primary motivator at this point would be primarily monetary. Like, I want to make some good money, but slowly and surely I will get picky. Like, this kind of job I want to pick, this kind of client I want to work with. Like, I will not work with businesses which are harming the environment. So, do you think designers by themselves have some responsibility on working with this kind of people? Like, they should be picky, or is it just the job of company to cater their policy?
Uh, it's a loaded question. I think as you're starting out, I don't think you have the position or the luxury to be picky. I think you can't really make a change unless you make a change within your life. I think
Yeah.
if you're at a point where you can afford to do that, then, well, it's ultimately also up to you. You know, not every action, you know, should be deemed, if you're just looking out for your own interests, it's perfectly fine, because there's the entire world, you know, and people always come with this grand idea, I want to change the world. But even changing your family situation, even changing your world is already a step forward, right? If you're making changes and progress within your personal, if you make changes in your personal life, then you're able to help others. You know, to me, uh, it's always been a part of me to be able to help somebody else. You know what I mean? And I can't speak for everybody. I don't think it's anyone's place to really tell them how to spend their lives. I
Yeah.
think we should aspire to do more than just to you know, create financial freedom for ourselves. I think that should be byproduct of doing something relevant. And oftentimes, through these instances where you're able to connect through pain points with other people, I think those opportunities will present themselves in much grander scale than you would otherwise just always put money at the forefront. If the conversation always starts with, well, how much I am going to make from this, that's not the right way to approach. And I think even in personal gains, when you approach a client and you come through the lens of, well, how much are you willing to pay? It's kind of a backwards approach because you just really see it as an exchange of some
Mm-hmm.
sort, but really it should be coming from the lens of what is your problem and how can I help you solve that? And if I can help
Yeah.
you solve that, what are you willing to invest into that solution? So it should
Mm-hmm.
be more of a, I guess, uh, holistic approach to these problems. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but it really depends on the stage of your life. So I don't think, when I started out, none of this philanthropic work or pro bono work or social impact work was even on the horizon. You just want to
Mm-hmm.
pay your bills at the end of the month, right?
Yeah. So you have a lot of experience, like 18 years of experience, and over the course, you have. I'm guessing that you have worked with different sizes of companies. So I'm just very curious, like, what is different at the level of Microsoft that is not present at the level of mom and pop store? Is it like huge differences, or there's a whole lot of money involved in this case?
Uh, there's a lot. Well, it's I would say they're polar opposites from one another. Um, the issues, the problems, I think, are the same.
Mm-hmm.
You want to build something, you want to reach your message, your product, your idea, your concept to somebody else. You want them to use those products and services, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that stays the same between mom and pop store or a big company. What changes is the relationship with money
Yeah.
along the way, where mom and pop store don't necessarily want to spend money or even understand the importance of the creative work. To them, it's when you start a business, you look to your left, you look to your right, you say, okay, this is what they're doing, therefore I should be doing that. And
Mm-hmm.
because you're not familiar with those areas, you see them as a checkpoint. And oftentimes when a family or a small business is born, there's a list of things and priorities that are populated. If you're opening a store, you need to get the location, you need to get the space, you need to hire the right workers, you need to incorporate, you need to do all these things. And somewhere down the bottom of that list, you will see, I need a website, I need a logo, I need branding. Most people don't even know what branding is. When it comes to a large scale companies, they know, they understand,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of the things that they build starts with branding, starts with
Yeah.
design, starts with those things, because that's what really drives their brand forward.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the one of the differences, and because of those differences, the amount of money people are willing to invest into those solutions are quite different. Most of the time, small stores, small businesses can't afford that. So to
Mm-hmm.
them, it's like, well, I want a logo. I'd love to have an amazing one, but I only willing to spend $50 on it.
Yeah.
Uh, and the one of the main drivers behind that, there's a personal relationship with the money. When a
Mm-hmm.
mom and pop store opens its business, it's their personal money, it's their personal savings that they're
Yeah.
spending. So they really are afraid of letting it go, and letting it go, especially into something that they don't understand at all. They see it as an expense. Whereas big companies, why the reason that Spotify, Uber are investing millions into their designs, into even creating custom typography, is because to them it's an investment. But more
Mm-hmm.
importantly, it's not their personal money that they're spending. It's not my personal savings as a creative director or a marketing manager. It's a budget. It's allocated budget that says, hey, this is what you have to spend for the year on these, and you just you find the right solution. So a hit or miss, it's still not a personal hit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your family won't necessarily be affected by it, unless of course you are at a senior level, and if you can continue just making wrong decisions, of course you potentially lose your job. But those things are far and few in between in comparison of what a small business and how it impacts them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna ask one controversial question. Since we have worked with these big brands, so there's an image of big bad corporations. Let's say Apple. They are quite infamous for using sweatshops in their production line. So at the higher level, do you think these people are aware that the public has this kind of we can say wrong images about their perceptions? Or do they care about this kind of stuff, like small sweatshops which are popping up here and there? Or is it just part of their supply chain and they don't give it much of a thought?
Um, I think some do, and I think how it used to be in the 80s and the 90s is quite different of what it is now. I think we as society become more conscious of those practices, so there's more pressure coming into the corporations to change how they do things. But to me, and in my personal opinion, that at the end of the day is that I think they care, but they don't care enough because they know they can afford to do that and continue to do that because it just of the sheer magnitude of things. You know, there's so many things that could be said about big companies, but if you think of it from a really selfish point of view, even when you're starting out and you have a project, for example, right? You say, okay, so somebody comes out to you and say, I need a website or I need a video done. You as the lead of the project determine, okay, I need help here, I need help there. You want to profit as much as you can because you want to make that money. So normally what you would do is you would most likely outsource some of the work to areas where the production cost is significantly lower. Therefore, you're pocketing more money. I think this is a fairly similar practice, just on a very large scale.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The goal is it's for profit, and that's how they make their money. You want to keep the production costs as low as possible. Is it right? No, I don't think it's right, but that's not really up to me. It's really just up to us collectively just to take a stand, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
I had this really interesting discussion about like how designers from third world countries face this problem of how positioning themselves, even if they're offering the similar quality of work as their competitor from the, let's say, Western counterparts, but still they are facing the discrimination based on their location. So, do you think in this near future, are you seeing any development in this field, like designer? It doesn't matter if you're a designer from India or designer from Colombia, Costa Rica, wherever you're from, you will be given the same like compensation as you were if you were in the Europe or in US or in other states. So do you think?
100% no, that's not the case. It's one of the issues that at No Shelter we would love to solve. Being from New York and having worked a lot of people from India, I know a lot of small companies and big companies alike rely on that. It's just for the sheer force of that, it's cheaper. And in the perception of the mind, cheaper does not mean equal great. You know what I mean? There is a prejudice that happens in the Western world that Indian developers are somehow more inferior to their Western counterparts, which is absolute bullshit. I can tell you right now, a good developer, a good designer, it doesn't matter where they're from. You know what I mean? There's equally same amount of bad developers and designers in the Western parts of the world as it could be anywhere else. I think the issue also stems from the fact that there's a cultural difference. You know, for example, I get a lot of emails from Indian companies that are just looking to white label the solutions. And I mean a lot, like every hour, every day, I would get an email or a LinkedIn message just like that. I think partially why there's no greater engagement or returns on those messages is for the sheer fact is that it's the same message. I don't think anyone really, I don't know, but to me, it feels that no one really spends the time to differentiate themselves from their competitors. It's to me, it's like a boilerplate. Hey, I'd love to connect with you. This is what we do. Can we work together on a project? And that's it. It's boilerplate, the same thing. The websites are the same, and it seems like a one big representation. Even though, if you get to know the people behind it, their strengths are always hidden because they don't think of those things. You know what I mean? It's very driven by look what we can do versus look what I can do for you. And I think that small change in narrative can yield greater results. Because I'll give you an example. I've worked with many of these companies, and while on the surface they're all the same, but when you do decide to give them chance, you really see that some of them excel at communication, some of them excel on the proficiency of these technologies. I've had partners like that I had to be on call, I had to be on video calls to work through the problems or the bugs or whatever for hours and hours, and nothing would change, versus having worked with a different company from the same area. There's literally, you send them a creative brief and it's done, and there's no problem. And it's like, when you come across those unicorns, it's like, why aren't you expressing those things? Because obviously I can be the only one that sees that, you know what I mean? But I think the difference is that the Western companies tend to speak a little more human language because they relate to Westerns and their pain points, whereas elsewhere it becomes more of a mechanical approach. It's like, I'm gonna hit as many people as I can. I don't care about what they do. I know that this is their title, this is what they do, and that's all I need to know. But if you spend a little extra time to getting to know the people behind it, I think it'll be a greater result.
Yeah. And I think hustle culture is probably responsible for that, because what I'm seeing that in my initial days, I was on Upwork, and there was a constant pressure from my peers that you should apply for more than 100 jobs. Then you are playing the numbers game. You are crafting a similar message, very same message, and you are just targeting as many people as you can, casting wide net. It doesn't matter like what you are reaping. You just send mass DMs, and that's the issue. But I think with the advent of, I can say, the online education which we are getting at this point, I'm seeing that the gap between the cultural gap, even the cultural gap, is closing very fast. Like, I can relate with the problems of Western, and I think internet is pretty much very. I have to thank the internet that I'm able to do this podcast even, or I'm able to join the program, because it would not be possible for me to even like meet with someone like you before this edutech or before the future.
100%. I think accessibility plays an integral role in breaking down these barriers of assumption. And I'm all for it. I think we just really need to spend more time just understanding one another, and just kind of let those assumptions rest. And those assumptions, I'm sure there are assumptions in your area towards Westerns. I'm sure there's always these assumptions. But that's the thing. Like, I think having the transparency, and why one of the reasons No Shelter is created is to kind of give that transparency. So when somebody is looking to hire you, they don't just see Ankit and just a list of things that you do. They get to know the person behind this. And I think oftentimes the product or a project is not solely on the merits of your knowledge. It's your personality. It's how easy is it to work with you. Will you be there to champion my success so I can do the same for you, right?
Yeah. I think trust plays a very important role on whether you will get a job or not. So it's been the case with me, that like, if I have gotten on the video call with someone, then there's a high possibility that I will close that job. But it's very difficult to convince someone in the text like I'll be able to help them in the way. So yeah, that's very interesting.
But the irony of it all is that Indian community at a high level are looked up to as the thought leaders. Like, if you look at the current landscape, a lot of CEOs are from Indian descent. Look at the CEO of Google. Those things are happening by a large numbers that wasn't precedented before. I've worked with big name companies, and their leads are always Indian people. Indian people are, if you get to that certain level, you become to be as known as the master. So it's like, well, how much harder do I have to work to kind of prove myself if at the certain threshold I'm not giving the same chances and I'm seen as an inferior human being or a creative, right?
Yeah. And yeah, sure. It's, I think, a job of my generation to close that gap, like the opportunity gap. Even that, even the top CEOs are kind of from the very privileged family here. Like, they were able to afford that kind of education, and they were able to send them abroad for education. Because I don't think it's a very in a huge number of people won't be able to even think of that. So even with the economic prosperity, I think that gap will close slowly but surely. So I
Yeah,
will give it the time.
but also education model is shifting.
Mhm.
Education isn't perceived the same way as it used to be historically.
Yeah.
It's no longer a requirement in a lot of spaces. You have access to a lot of learning tools, as you mentioned yourself. Working even through pro group, you get
Mhm.
immediate access where 10, 20 years ago that wasn't possible. You
Yeah.
had to go to school.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I saw your tweet about design thinking. This was about like, can design thinking or design sprints can help solve problems with, I think it was police condition in the New York.
Hmm.
So do you think, what was your thought process behind that? Like how you can use design thinking to make better decisions at policy level?
Right. I mean, that's a long uphill battle. So to give a bit of context, that programs and processes such as design thinking and design sprints and ideation has been around for a long, long time. Uh, they are widely used at a corporate level in big startups, companies
Mhm.
like Airbnb, Uber, all
Yeah.
these, I would consider them a newly founded success stories. The reason they're scaling to that degree is that they're utilizing this process and utilizing them well. As I
Mhm.
started this journey, I started to see a trend that big companies, and I don't want to name any names, as well as federal entities,
Yeah.
are trying to implement these processes within their organizations. There's a federal organization of defense in the United States that have reached
Mhm.
out to me. Um, Not to me, but I was presented inadvertently with the opportunity to do something with that. I unfortunately had to pass on it. But
Mhm.
I saw that it's like, okay, if government and these big corporations are now taking notice of these uh, processes, that means it's on the rise. It means we are shifting from I'm gonna build something and you're gonna like it versus to, well, what would you like, and let's build it together. And I think that's the
Mhm.
core premise of design thinking, is that we're entering it through putting humans first, and empathy is the main driver of this
Yeah.
decision making of product building. So when you look at it like this, and if you really step away from your, I guess, understanding of what a designer or creative can do, if you really look at the root of it, creative creates. We create
Mhm.
things on many different levels. The most widely used is, of course, building brands, products, and so on. But what if you take it a step further and take it from a societal lens, from an economic lens, from a equality lens? Can these processes be used to shape what the next generational future will look like in terms of their practices? Whether it's police, whether it's
Mhm.
judicial systems, whether it's racist commentary, whether it's whatever the case may be. If we were to take these processes where we're putting humans and empathy at the forefront of decision making, is it possible to make a change then? I think that's really is the core foundation of how we try to operate,
Yeah.
is to really understand, like, well, yeah, of course we can build a brand, we can build an app, and build a website, but what does it ultimately do? It pays my bills for a month. But what
Mhm.
happens in 100 years? What are these big steps that we're willing to take, or at least try to pave the way for others to continue the journey long after we're gone? And I think that's really, even on a grand scale of ambition, if you look at Elon Musk and his goals of like going to Mars,
Mhm.
he knows he's not going to make it to Mars himself, but
Yeah.
he's paving the way for others to be able to do it. And just by aiming so high, he's making bigger progresses towards it. Even if he doesn't reach that goal, somebody else has the foundation to continue that journey on, right?
Yeah. And
Does that
interestingly,
answer you?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I was looking at the BeCurious website, and there was a client wish list, and I saw SpaceX, CERN, NASA, and Neil deGrasse Tyson on there. So I'm guessing from that you are interested in space and that kind of exploration.
Both. I'm interested in those companies as companies themselves, as the
Mm-hmm.
culture. I'm interested in their mission. Of course, NASA is deeply rooted in history, uh, even through Cold War and just
Yeah.
that space race. It's great to see these companies that are really taking pride in what they're doing, but also building or giving opportunities to create some iconic designs along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Neil deGrasse Tyson is just I love science, so this is one of the people that I look up to and admire to. And of course, it would be lovely if the opportunity presents itself to work with somebody like that, because
Yeah.
that's the beauty of our job is that we get to learn new practices, new sciences, new religious views along the way, depending on the project. That's why
Yeah.
I don't want to pigeonhole myself into one specific category because then I will be robbed of the opportunity to learn something new.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah,
Okay, so I will ask a very cliche question. It is very cliche.
sure.
So, if you have to start like just now your design journey, the things that have changed over 18 years, where would you start and what would you see as a good path to arrive where you are currently?
Am I starting out with the knowledge that I have now, or am I starting out with the knowledge that I had when I was starting out? Because that would be two different things.
It depends. I think with the knowledge you have currently, so that would be a better answer.
Okay. Well, I think first and foremost, I would be mindful of your own internal happiness. I think
Mm-hmm.
ultimately that is the make or break compass for you.
Yeah.
A lot of times it will be very hard to do something if your heart is not in it. If your heart is not in it, then you're not giving the best version of that to anybody. Part of solving that problem is really just being mindful of what makes you happy, what type of project makes you happy. That also helps with niching down. That also helps with identifying where you want to lead. You know,
Mm-hmm.
as we start learning, we tend to kind of have this fear of like I want to offer it all because I don't want to miss an opportunity, but that's just an endless race to the bottom. I think
Mm-hmm.
you throughout your journey something will speak to you more than others. As when I started my education, I learned all principles of design, the
Mm-hmm.
typography, whatever the case may be, but none of that truly spoke to me until I hit a product design opportunities, and that's what really spoke to me. That's what ultimately became my vehicle for my journey. And I think you just need to find yours. And I think one way of doing it is you really need to just try different things in the beginning and see what makes sense to you. Your
Yeah.
goals, your ambitions may change as you get older and you experience new things, but that moral compass of like, if it brings me happiness, then I'm on the right path. But if you see yourself falling in the trap of I'm miserable,
Mm-hmm.
then you're doing something wrong, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's very interesting, like finding your purpose. Like, I think I was on the cohort with Annalie, and there's a segment of finding your purpose. So I pretty much got stuck there. Like, I haven't explored anything yet to define my purpose. So, do you think like finding your purpose, or it needs a lot of time and experimenting with different things, trying and testing different things, or you should at least make one thing as your focus and spend some time there, like niche down, and then try different things.
Right. I think in the beginning, you will confuse your proficiency with your purpose. You will
Okay.
master one tool, you will master
Mm-hmm.
one segment, and you will be quickly to call it your purpose because that's familiar.
Yeah.
Uh, but that doesn't make it a purpose. It means you just mastered something quicker than the other. And I think that initial step of, well, I know Photoshop super well, so let me just go and work in that because I know it,
Mm-hmm.
very quickly wears out because you get the same things and you ultimately find it, I'm so tired of doing this. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think it should be a good balance of You need to experiment, you need to try new things, and but you always need to have that moral checkpoint for yourself, and then seeing, okay, I've done these, let's say, 5 projects in the past. What do I get out of it? What did I learn along the way? What brings me happiness? So I think if you are able to find a project that allows you to explore many avenues, would be the ultimate goal. So if
Mhm.
you land a branding project, with branding most likely will come web design or product design or
Mhm.
marketing or SEO. So when you're starting out, try that. And fortunately for a lot of beginners, that when you work with the small clients, mom and pop store, those opportunities are all bundled together. If you're not going to
Mhm.
go to Spotify and they're going to ask you to do their logo and their their app design, that's not going to
Yeah.
happen. But in the smaller instances, people will look for that bargain. Like, why would I spend 5K on all these different things where I can just do it in one shot? And that gives you an opportunity to explore which of these processes did you enjoy the most.
Yeah.
And through that, you'll hopefully able to find your inspiration. And I think this also goes to, it shouldn't come from just your experience. You have to find people that you admire and see what they're doing, and not
Mhm.
all of them have to really be in the same creative sphere. You can look at somebody completely opposite. Like, to me, my inspiration comes from stand-up comedy, for example.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Their processes are very similar to how we work as creatives, but it just gives a different lens of narrative, of like, well, I view this world through this lens. So how can I draw a parallel between a a social commentary through the lens of a comedian, and how does it get parallel in the world of product design? You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you're still dealing with the same people.
For sure. And I've been thinking about this from my early childhood. I would used to remember that ads were pretty. They are probably mostly on like big billboards and on the television. So they were broadcasted to a huge number of audience, and they were very general or either very vague. But nowadays, I'm seeing that ads or even the brand communication is getting more and more intimate. Like it seems like that ad is directly talking to me. So, in this journey, where do you think like this conversation style is going? Like the brand communication, it has become, it has come to level of intimate. Like I can directly see that this ad is talking to me. So, in the future, where do you think like with more and more data, they will able to with the research, they will able to easily pick apart your basic psychological patterns, like where do you go, where do you live, and they can pretty much map out your whole lifestyle. So on that basis the communication will be more intimate. So where do you think this brand communication might encroach your privacy, or is there a fine line between this brand communication?
Uh, I think we're already halfway there. I think
Hmm.
it's getting super personalized.
Yeah.
I think we still have a big majority. The money holders, the decision makers, are still older generations. That's
Hmm.
why the traditional media hasn't died out yet.
Yeah.
But with the emerging of new generations, I think it will become more personalized. Uh, and you know, when you study like the old media advertisement, like when you watch shows like Mad Men,
Hmm. Yeah.
it was an art form. It wasn't a quickly produced piece of junk. It was carefully thought out ways and strategies of how to present a brand and how to relate it to their customers. So I think it was a little bit more artful and thought out. I
Hmm.
think in order for it to progress into the future, it needs to be based on that type of notions, that don't be quick to produce something. As much as you're personalizing by you using the data that you found on me, why don't you spend a little bit more time in creating the conversation with me? Don't just expose
Yeah.
me to your brand, but really have a conversation with me. And I already see that happening in a way that a lot of companies prefer to work with smaller agencies. Where before, one of the reasons why I started my agency is, of course, I wanted to have the ownership, but I saw that the traditional way of working, and I've worked
Hmm.
with big global ad agencies that are coming from that background of the 60s, 50s. Those names are still here. They still are the giants, but
Yeah.
more and more creatives are stepping away into opening their smaller sized agencies. And the reason for that is that customers prefer intimate relationships. So if customers that are hiring you prefer that, then why wouldn't they assume that their customers want the same from them, right?
Yeah.
With the creations of these reels and stories and social platforms where you spend most of your time on it, very few, at least to me, make me stop from the scroll. And those that make me stop from the scroll are more creatively inclined and more thought out than the rest. I think we've gotten so deep into the automation
Yeah.
that we've forgotten the human aspect of the entire thing.
For sure. And I'm pretty much skeptical about like how this brand communication or even the advertisement is gonna be in the metaverse, because I'm foreseeing it's gonna be a real soon. Like we're gonna be talking in VR headsets. So I'm pretty much
Yeah,
skeptical. Like, what would the level of intimacy there?
I, I've attended few metaverse meetings already. It was a nightmare. Uh, I think the metaverse poses much more uh, different threat than just the commerce side of things or brand side of things. I think there's a lot of ethical and moral grounds that need to be laid out first. And while the future certainly looks like an episode of Black Mirror or something
Yeah.
that is super seamless and HD, we're still at the early stages that looks like Minecraft. So I think we have ways to go before that, but we need to start having these conversations now. So I think part of those conversations should be, if you're already really separating me from reality, you have to make it worthwhile. And it really still goes back into, you know yes, you're fighting for my attention, but now that you have it, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
I think metaverse presents a lot of great opportunities for people who are disabled and are unable to explore the world fully. I think it's a great refuge. I think there's a lot of potential for it, for psychotherapy, for even personal therapy and physical fitness therapy. But there's just a lot, and I think we're really stepping with the wrong foot forward by
Yeah.
making it all about capital gains. It's really just, I want to be the first one. Like, even look at the landscape of NFT. NFT is a baby. It's such a new concept, but we rushed so fast into it that we just produced 99% is just garbage. Is
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, what it started out as a way to exchange art forms has really just become like, okay, cool. We just quickly want to just make money. Forget anything else, and it's just such a clusterfuck and digital pollution if you think about it. It's
Yeah.
just like, I I explore and I kind of look at this market as a new form, but I definitely somebody who actually is able to paint or draw. I'm not even entertaining that idea yet, because I feel like there's a lot more. Like, even if the big like artists that I know and like world renowned illustrators are not on it, then it's like it becomes almost like TikTok, where it just fools you into believing that you are a dancer or a performer, but
Yeah.
really you're just there harvesting your own likes, your own pats on the back, right?
For sure. And I think, as you mentioned, the TikTok, I'm still wondering about like we are, we have opened so many social like the thing with social media addiction. It's a completely new concept, and I don't think our psychological or even scientific, we don't have even scientific research to prove that what effect the social media is currently having on young brains. And I'm able to see the effects of like even the small kids in my neighborhoods are constantly on their phone watching YouTube Kids and some kind of stuff. And since we are going even through this journey, we are not able to fully comprehend the psychological effect we are having only with this two dimensional object. When we,
uh,
yeah.
yes and no. There is a company called the Humane Technology. which are the guys that put out the documentary, the social network,
Yeah.
right? So those are based on studies. The increase of suicides in teens, the increase of learning disadvantages in teens are all stemming kind of from that. I don't know how true or accurate or how big or how they even harvest that data, but if it's already significant enough to for companies to start kind of whistleblowing in the industry and really put out that type of information out, I think it's like that it's headed in that direction. Like, yeah, we probably should be paying a little bit more close attention to what is happening. Like, even for myself, that I spend majority of my time in front of the screen. It doesn't have to be social media. It's just me in front of the screen all the time affects your physical health, affects your moral health. One of the things that I experienced that a while back, I didn't have a cell phone for a pretty good amount of months, and it was a really truly liberating experience. I feel relieved that I take less and less phone calls. Where before, you like when you run a business or you work for somebody, everything was phone based. I'm glad to be able to step away from that. I'm still, of course, this is with me 24/7, but I don't think you can get away from that. I think it just the world shift. You either with it or you're against it, and I don't think there's a substitute for that. And but it's really just becomes personal and parental responsibility of how these they're tools. At the end of the day, they're tools. They're no different from a telephone, from a VCR, from an old tube television, from a newspaper. It's really how we use it and how we integrate it into our own social life. But I think that should be left to the people to decide. I don't think we should start banning things or products or whatever. It just you have the responsibility of how you use it, and ultimately, bullying will occur on screen, off screen, whatever the case may be. So it's really up to us as people to figure out how we use it. You can't blame a tool for something all the time, right?
Yeah. But at the same time, I think as a UX designer or even as a product designer, since there are so many techniques that we are using, like in the TikTok feed, I'm forgetting the name, there's a very interesting phenomena which they use. I think it's called variable reinforcement, where you will never know like what will pop in your feed. There's a lot of randomness in between, which is very similar to the casino, like gambling machines. So I think as a UX designer, even who is someone who's aware about this kind of stuff, it's our job to kind of let the people know that this stuff is happening out there. And just like we put the warning on the cigarette labels, like this is dangerous for you, but it's your own responsibility, whatever you want to do with your body. That's my opinion on the thing. Like,
no,
at least we should create awareness.
I 100% agree. But that goes back into the decision and how we're viewed, because what authority do you have behind your voice as a creative? Yes, but we see that as like we're doing the service to the world, but ultimately, even the biggest designers are really just talking to other designers. They're not talking directly to, like, the one true form of capturing that is really just putting out a video, like a documentary. But even that, how many people are truly interested? Only those who are directly in contact with those instances, right? Otherwise, I have no interest in what. Like, I'm not a lawyer. Do I know everything that's going on in the law and how I only hear those things when something in the news happens that, oh, it directly affects me. Oh shit! So what can I do now? But by the time it gets to the media, that's a little too late already, right? But I agree. I think the one way you can change that is just to select the type of clients you want to work with, and if you have that moral compass of things that you care about, then you will try to find people that share that vision with you. So if you're against TikTok or how it's used or how it captures your, don't work with TikTok. If enough people take a stand like that, it will become significantly harder for them to move forward, right? The same like what's happening in Russia is that I don't approve it. I'm a McDonald's. what can I do? Oh, I can just stop working with them. So you sanction that, entity against doing business with them. So that's one way. But that's the thing, is that you can only do that when you're able to afford that. As a newcomer, if somebody's coming in and say, "Yeah, I'm gonna give you $100,000 to work for TikTok," yeah, you will be designing those clickbait ads, and you will be designing whatever they ask of you. That's the nature of the game.
For sure, yeah.
Like one of the
Wow.
reasons I started also the company is because, like, when I worked for a different company, I saw this immense talent of people that are brilliant designers, engineers, but they were all just building products that had a half shelf life. That, like, we're building garbage. Like, we're building things that was like we could be doing so much better and so much greater. So I kind of was really displeased of, like, we'll just take any project that comes along, and that's it. Doesn't matter what it is. So when I started the agency, that was one of the premises. Like, I really want to curate who I work with. But when you start out and you have people depend on you, and if you haven't made a sale in so long, it's like it becomes increasingly difficult to be choosy and picky, right? If somebody comes in and says, "Build me an app that shows me, whatever, how busy a neighborhood bar is." Okay, cool. You have the money. Cool. It'll pay my salary. It'll pay the salary for my workers. Great. You know what I mean? But it's only until you get to a certain level and you have a little bit of a wiggle room to play with is when you can start making those choices along the way. But I think even if you go through trial by fire in the beginning of your journey, if you are able to put yourself in a position that the second part of your life is dedicated to that, it's a start, right?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Stanley. Wow, it's been a really amazing conversation, and I'm sure whoever is watching and listening, they've learned a lot. So please let us know, like, where we can find you and what your social avenues are, where we can reach out to you.
You can just find me on brutallyhuman.com. It has all my social links, and everything you want to learn about me is in my personal website. And thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate you spending the time with me. I love talking to you, man.
It was really awesome.
Cool.